from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Want to ask you a question, I guess. This is all about the fighting about power. You know, why he worries about the $1 trillion that U.S. are the bureaucrats, according to him, that he wants to say that. Why worried about that? Britain ruled the world for 300 years. I'm from Jamaica. Britain holds Jamaica a lot. You understand? And he's worrying about $1 trillion that the IMF is going to spread around and give poor people money, you know, that they could have a better life. You know, you sit there in London, you are the bureaucrats. You make people suffer, have no food to eat, and a lot of things like that. And you're worried about $1 trillion where it's going.
Mr. Hannan, do you want to respond to that sentiment?
Well, that suffering has been happening under the current system. So if we take your analysis, so why feed it with more money? And where do you think the money is coming from? You know, it's coming from everyone, including Jamaican taxpayers and US taxpayers and British taxpayers. Look, if it were better for the IMF, the World Bank, or any of these other organizations to spend money than it is for individuals to spend money, then communism would have worked, you know, but it didn't. And you say, why am I worried about $1 trillion? Well, you know, $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there, and pretty soon you're talking real money. I mean, we're talking about astronomical sums of money. And almost the reason why they're getting away with it, all these bailouts, all these stimulus packages, all these pork barrel things, is precisely because people find the sums hard to picture. They can't envisage that amount of money, so they just say, oh yeah, it's okay, maybe they know what they're doing, it's a lot, but you know, what do I know? You know, the truth is, my country is now more indebted than it was on VE Day, right? Gordon Brown has borrowed more than Winston Churchill borrowed to win the Second World War with help from the US and Jamaica, right? With the obvious difference that we haven't just been fighting the Second World War. We've been doing all this during years of low inflationary growth and high tax receipts and low welfare spending, and we ran this massive deficit, this massive borrowing requirement, which I think is just unforgivable.
Ocean County, New Jersey, good morning.
Good morning. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
You have probably heard the slogan or the statement, "The house divided cannot stand." I wonder then, how do you reconcile your position now, the out-of-power conservative position, with the economists of both sides who say that spending is a practical way out of this problem? Isn't it a lot easier to be a naysayer? And just imagine, if you will, if you accept my analogy of rowing. I mean, there could be a dispute in the boat amongst the people which way to go. Once a decision is made, if both sides don't row, you're going to go in circles, no? I'd like to hear your response to that, and if you have any questions of me as an American citizen, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, thank you. I don't think it's easier to be a naysayer. I think it's much easier to go along with the consensus. When everyone is demanding that something be done, it's a politician, a brave politician, and one who is prepared to risk a lot of unpopularity, who says, well, you know, I'm sorry, guys, I'm not sure that there's much that can be done. You're right that a number of professional economists backed the stimulus package. They were generally not people who had seen the crash coming. They would have more credibility if they had. I'm not sure that there is much in their record that suggests that they're the people to trust now. There was a similar consensus, you know, behind the, going back to the gold standard in the UK, which was a calamity. There was a similar consensus among all the economists about against the Thatcher reforms, against monetarism. There was a similar consensus about going into the exchange rate mechanism and the euro. You know, these consensuses can be terribly, terribly wrong. And often nobody sees that except the general electorate. What struck me is that all of these fire hosings of money that were decreed by political and media elites were done without public consent. And as soon as people started running opinion polls, what we would say, what we would call outside the Westminster Village, what you might call outside the Beltway, it turned out that large majorities of people didn't want it and felt hard done by. And they can see in their own lives that, you know, if you've overborrowed and you've got 5 credit cards and you can't pay your money back, you don't take out a new credit card. What you do is you try and live within your means. And, you know, you have to be a politician not to understand that that argument applies equally to states.
This viewer from Bangor, Maine with this question: should the World Bank, GATT, and IMF be disbanded?
I mean, I think the best thing that we can have in terms of international collaboration, the best thing we can have is free trade. The one good thing that came out of the G20 summit was that there was a commitment towards completion of the Doha round and further tariff reduction. I think the thing that definitely exacerbated the last recession was protectionism, and if we can stave that off, great. Do you then need all these other organizations? Well, maybe it is sensible to have a capacity for loans. You know, the market is sticky at the edges. Sometimes a state needs a sudden source of money. Do you, though, need all these great rules on banking practice? Should that be done in common, as is now being proposed in the aftermath of the summit? No, I think that's a mistake. I think it's a mistake because when you centralize policy, you disincentivize competitiveness, you disincentivize experimentation, and you disincentivize enterprise.
Middletown, New Jersey. Next on the Democrats line with Daniel Hannan, joining us from London. Good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning, Mr. Hannan.
Good morning.
The way I see it is that our nation's financial woes began with the first mention about 30 years ago of a new world order, with your country's neoliberalism and Thatcherism and our nation's President Reagan accepting the economic ideology of supply-side economics. We are a consumer-based economy. 85% is consumer-based, 15% investor-based. So this new vision of what our economy should be created a situation where wages were frozen for the working class, our consumer-based, and our investors were given free rein to create casinos instead of investment and banking and safe situations for our economy. As a result, with wages being frozen and then in the last 8 years, wages declining in our nation, the consumer-based society kept on consuming, but they consumed on credit debt rather than on what they made in wages. And that's why the whole thing was destined to fall apart.
Well, I agree with you to the extent that, yes, there was plainly a problem with credit. There was a credit bubble. Now, where I disagree with you is you blame that on Reaganite or Thatcherite economics. I disagree. I think that the decision to keep interest rates too low for too long was a political one rather than a market one. It happened everywhere. I mean, it wasn't something that only happened with the Fed. It happened equally with the Bank of England, with the European Central Bank, and with the Bank of Japan. But they were responsible for this cheap lending. It's too simplistic to say, you know, this was a failure of absence of regulation and we now need more regulation. It just doesn't stack up. I mean, the subprime boom was something that politicians had been pushing. You know, there was legislation first from the Carter era, then from the Clinton era, basically encouraging banks to lend to prospects that they would have not wanted to lend to on their own. Now, as late as last year, Congress was telling Freddie and Fannie to make more cheap money available. So it doesn't work to say the problem was that we had all this free market capitalism and now we need more rules to fix it. You know, there is almost no problem in the world that can't be exacerbated by additional state intervention, and I'm afraid this is one of them.
Another headline from yesterday's G20 summit, this from the Washington